Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. We're welcome to the webinar, and we're just going to wait about 1 minute to start so that I know that some people don't realize they have to download the GoToWebinar software. So we're just going to wait a couple minutes or 1 minute, and we'll start shortly. Okay, so we'll just get started now. Welcome everybody to the webinar. I'm Robert Beringer, and I'm going to be talking about our research on advanced care planning, which I may at times simply refer to as ACP, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender older adults, to whom I'll refer to as LGBT. Dr. Gutman and Dr. Vries will join in later to the webinar to share some of the reflections on this research project with the LGBT community to date. To keep ambient background noise to a minimum, everybody will be muted during the presentation. There's going to be a question and answer period at the end, and you may type your questions into there's a box at the lower right-hand side of the screen, and you can open that and type your questions in there. You can do them as you're going along, and we will address all of those at the end of the presentation. So iCAN-ACP is a national study that aims to narrow the gap between the care that frail elderly Canadians want and the care that they receive. We're testing ways to improve advanced care planning conversations between patients, families, and health professionals. Our team is the Diversity Access Team, and we're focused on advanced care planning in ethnic and sexual minority populations, LGBT, Chinese, and South Asian. The Diversity Access Team is accessing, tailoring, implementing, and evaluating advanced care planning tools aimed at these populations. And the focus of this webinar, of course, is our work with the LGBT community. So a quick overview of our project. We have 2 completed studies. The LGBT non-metropolitan older adults study, that was with 6 focus groups with 32 participants in total. And we also have the older men living with HIV/AIDS in Montreal, and that was 1 focus group with 7 participants, and this was reported elsewhere. We had a webinar last year. I won't talk about that today. And there are 2 studies currently in progress. There's the primary care physicians and hospitalists. That's for those with a patient base that is at least 15% LGBT, and that patient base must be 55 years of age and over. So the focus, as I said, of today's webinar will be the LGBT non-metropolitan study, and I'm also going to provide some preliminary results from our primary care and hospitalist study. So today's webinar will proceed as follows. Regarding the non-metropolitan LGBT study, I'm going to take about 15 minutes to cover the background and methods, the focus group themes, and tailoring LGBT ACP planning tools. I'm also going to have just a few words about our physician study since it's underway. And then we'll have reflections on our work thus far from Gloria Gutman and Brian Vries, up to 10 minutes each. And then a question and answer period at the very end, maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes. So background and methods. First off, what is ACP? What is advanced care planning? It is a process that supports adults at any stage or any age or stage of health in understanding and sharing their personal values, life goals, and preferences regarding future medical care. The goal of advanced care planning is to ensure that people receive care that is consistent with their values, goals, preferences during serious and chronic illness. Advanced care planning can improve the patient experience at one of life's most stressful times, and it can align treatment with patient preferences avoiding unwanted and costly invasive treatments. Well, the whole webinar could be devoted to discuss the unique history and life course of LGBT older adults. Today, however, it is important to highlight these three features. First, on a general level, due in part to discrimination and stigma over the life course, older LGBT persons tend to have a distrust of healthcare systems. Advanced care planning is vitally important to LGBT persons who often have complex support networks. These are comprised of some or no family members, families of choice, which include friends, for example, and then also partners with varying degrees of legal status. And we'll also discuss the rural-urban dynamic and the non-metropolitan context. So it's important to discuss this context in greater depth. Existing literature has found for LGBT people living in rural, small town, small city, and even suburbs of large urban centers is different in comparison to their urban LGBT peers. Most important to note is that in non-metropolitan spaces, they are wrought with sanctions, and these are perceived to be more so than in urban areas. And this is especially relevant to behaviors that do not align with very dominant masculine heterocentric norms. Sanctions can range from physical acts to psychosocial behaviors. They include property damage, violence, and an array of other acts of discrimination. So combining this non-metropolitan context with the aforementioned stigma over the life course and mistrust of healthcare systems led us to theorize that under such conditions and with limitations in terms of resource access, that LGBT persons living in such regions may have limited experience with advanced care planning. This led to the development of our research questions. So taking into consideration the LGBT context and the non-metropolitan dynamic we have discussed, we sought to examine the level of engagement in advanced care planning among non-metropolitan older LGBT persons, and also to introduce a region-specific planning tool which is in development and receive feedback about this tool. The planning tool is called My Wishes, My Care. It's a 35-page booklet aimed at supporting conversations about advanced care planning with loved ones and healthcare providers. It was developed by the BC Centre for Palliative Care. The tool offers a definition of advanced care planning and asks readers to consider any worries, wishes they may have about healthcare in the future and questions concerned with personal care and comfort. For example, what gives you comfort and who do you want to be with in a time of need? The planning tool then also describes relevant medical terminology, such as life-prolonging treatments, medical scope of care, and it also has various legal documents, such as representation agreement and advance directive. These all may become part of one's advanced care plan and ultimately includes forms that can be used to prepare an advanced care plan. To explore research questions, we conducted 6 focus groups, one each in the communities of Nanaimo, Kelowna, Powell River, Prince George, Port Alberni, and Salt Spring Island, all in British Columbia. Our inclusion criteria, we were looking for English-speaking adults, 55 years of age and over, who self-identified as LGBT. All in total, we had 32 participants. 12 were female, 11 lesbian, 1 identified as fluid, 1 trans woman who identified as lesbian, and 19 were men, 18 gay, and 1 fluid. The terms, in terms of non-metropolitan, we chose locations that were located at least 45 minutes outside of Victoria and Vancouver, which are BC's 2 largest centers. We felt this fit in fine with the definition earlier that even in suburbs of large cities, large metropolitan areas, the sanctions can be experienced. So the focus group discussions were audio recorded, transcribed, and then they were manually coded using Microsoft Word to sort and arrange the data. 4 themes emerged from the focus group transcripts. These were information uncertainty, the planning tool, concerns about the temporary substitute decision maker, and the LGBT perspective. So under the theme information uncertainty, this focused on practical concerns regarding the administrative components of storing and registering one's advanced care plan. The theme has 2 categories, lost or outdated information, and how will they find my advanced care plan? Several participants shared that advanced care planning documents they had completed in the past were now out of date. For example, all the people involved are no longer part of my life, or that the documents were missing. One participant said, I've misplaced the representation agreement somewhere under our house. So not knowing the location of one's documents led to an in-depth discussion regarding how would one's advanced care plan be found in event of an emergency. 13 participants shared these concerns, and one lesbian participant queried, how are hospitals going to handle it, getting your information? Extending this thought, another lesbian participant suggested, tradition will play out before they get to the paperwork. Here she's suggesting that you'll get resuscitated, potentially against your wishes, in a hospital well before someone saw your advanced care plan. These concerns seem to underscore the uncertainty and suspicion with which LGBT older adults approach the healthcare field. So moving to the planning tool, this theme comprised 3 categories. First, impressions of the planning tool, the wishes and care sides of the advanced care planning equation. The first impressions were further organized under the headings positive and negative. On the positive side, a lesbian participant, I think that's the gift, having this book and talking about it. On the negative side, another participant noted, there was zero thinking about people of other sexual orientations. The wishes side of the equation revealed some deeply personal concerns. One lesbian participant shared how fearful she was of being put into a nightgown that she felt was typical of what one might find in a healthcare setting, simply because, or quite alarming because as a child, being sexually abused, the nightgown represented to her was like easy access. In terms of care, a gay male stated quite firmly, dialysis, no. Feeding tube, no. No pacemaker, no ventilator. No, I don't want people to look at me like I'm a fucking vegetable. Pardon me before I die. So some people had quite specific concerns. They were quite illuminating, I found. Before looking at the next theme, I think it's important to start by sharing with you what the participants saw. This is a copy of the temporary substitute decision maker list in British Columbia. So in the event you do not have not designated someone to make decisions on your behalf, the first person on this list who is willing, available, and qualifies would be chosen. You can see that close friend is located well down the list. And as we'll see going through the themes, that this had quite an impact on the participants. So the temporary substitute decision maker list. This theme had 3 categories. First impressions of the TSDM list as set out by BC law, the temporary substitute decision maker you don't want, and their likely choice of a TSDM. Many participants shared their first impressions of the TSDM list, and several participants used the word scary in their response. A gay male participant summed up the limitations of the list, commenting, if you have no one on this list, you are SOL. Almost half of the participants expressed concerns regarding the temporary substitute decision maker list that you do not want. Mostly they focused on the legacy of discrimination as an LGBT person. A trans woman identifying as lesbian commented she has family that has totally disowned me. 14 participants shared who they would like their temporary substitute decision maker to be, and the choices were split with roughly half choosing their partner and half choosing a family member. Which family member varied from second cousin to children to siblings. All of those choosing a family member were not partnered. For those with partners, only one did not identify a partner as the choice for TSDM. A gay male indicated, this is the one with the partner, my sister and I got a very good friend. This point sort of ties us back to the important role of families of choice in the lives of LGBT individuals. So the LGBT's perspective. This theme has 2 opposing categories. First, that the advanced care plan needs to take into consideration, well, actually the advanced care planning tool needs to take into consideration the unique needs of the LGBT community. The second is that the advanced care plan has nothing to do with being LGBT. So concerns regarding the need to tailor advanced care planning interventions to LGBT were expressed by a variety of participants, including a fluid female participant. The information that is out there, she said, doesn't in any way acknowledge that there are LGBT people living in relationships. This advanced care planning affects LGBT people more because more of us tend not to live in the standard way, another said. Only 3 participants echoed an opposing viewpoint, such as one gay male's assertion that, once again, this has nothing to do with being gay. He's talking about choosing a TSDM and preparing an advanced care plan. These 3 participants essentially felt preparation of such a plan is something important to all older adults, and thus the tools did not need to be tailored for the LGBT community. So we're going to do a little shifting of gears. I'm going to now share with you the suggestions we had about the planning tool called My Wishes, My Care. So in the diversity access team, we obtained feedback from 3 minority populations pertaining to the cultural appropriateness of 2 advanced care planning tools. Today, I'll focus on the top center guide in this slide, which is called My Wishes, My Care, and the feedback on this tool provided by our LGBT sample. I said 2, but you'll see that there's a total of 3 planning guides in this slide. The 2 on the lower portion of the side are in essence the same tool, the Conversation Starter Kit. The difference between the 2 Conversation Starter Kits is that the purple guide on the lower right is tailored for use with people who have dementia. So feedback on the planning tool, and we're talking about My Wishes, My Care. There were 2 levels of feedback. Feedback pertinent to tailoring the advanced care planning educational tool to materials to the LGBT community, and then feedback pertinent specifically to the design of a given guide. And this is commentary on grammar and spelling and specific things they thought could have been just changed or reordered. So we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the how they can be tailored to LGBT. So there were 6 themes or topics that emerged from the transcripts: level of understanding, family, cultural inclusivity, images, and other. This actually category was large enough to split into 2 categories. So we have images and other that we're going to talk about. Also design elements and suggested alternate formats. So to begin with, level of understanding, something that runs through the feedback is a combination of both critique and positive comments. So I guess that's sort of what you'd expect when you're asking people what they think about something. In any event, in this slide, what we see is that on one hand, the subjects and solutions are difficult. I still do not understand what documents I need to have filled out. And in contrast, this guide's very readable and easy to understand, easy to follow. So family, in the category of family, we find the critique. There's nothing straightforward for those of us disconnected from our families. The overwhelming emphasis is on family, biological family connections, which for many of us are completely irrelevant. So this is tying back to the literature we talked about and the idea of chosen family for older LGBT and LGBT in general, people in general. And then we also had in the positive, we thought, people said, I think it's very good, especially for gay people who don't always have somebody to look after them. I'm quite comfortable using the guide with my husband, said one gay participant, and I'm also sharing it with my mother, who needs to complete an advanced care plan. Cultural inclusivity. In terms of images, this is a very interesting topic. Again, both critique and positive feedback. On the critique side, someone said, photographs might include a same-sex couple. We need a more definitive picture of an LGBTQ couple. I did not see trans or gender non-conforming people reflected in the pictures. It was clear to me that there was a photo, it was not clear to me that there was a photo of a same-sex couple. So this is the photo in question on the slide here. And it's just interesting that we've had this dual perception. So on the positive side, another person said, it's just good, we're being included. They thought of us. So she perceives the 2 men on the cover here to be a couple. Another person said, I appreciated the diversity represented in the pictures. It is interesting how the participants reacted to the pictures on the slide. Some felt it was a couple, others not. Just a further note on this. On the next slide, I have it. There they are in the center. And a person commented, after looking at, these are other pictures that are in the book beside it. I see affection between opposite sex couples and not between same-sex couples. For me, this just shows me the extent of, how how much we're looking at things for to see if we're, as LGBTQ people, are included or not. So cultural inclusivity other, in this feedback topic, all of the comments are critiques. So the quotes could be more inclusive, saying partner instead of husband. That sort of again talks about the heteronormativity that we talked at the beginning. The brochure does not address being queer at all. The importance of choosing a TDSM for LGBTQ or anyone may be estranged from their families is not covered. It's a little bit insulting that LGBTQ are not represented the way visible minorities are. Again, note the level of comparison to how well LGBT is represented and their perceptions, how it compares to other minorities. And then there's no mention of the whole thing about pronouns, said one participant. So in terms of design elements, we have both critique and positive feedback. It did not excite me or capture my imagination or heart. It reads too much like a guide for people who are close to end of life. Now, this was interesting. In our focus groups, we often talked about how advanced care planning is really relevant to everybody. You know, a person who's in their 30s, if they're in a car accident, they might have a particular family member they want to speak for them as well. So this came out quite a bit in the focus groups. Technical question here, or technical comment. White text on color background was rather small, low contrast, so commenting on maybe it's a bit difficult to read. And my God, that's a long booklet. So on the positive side, one person said there's a logic, a flow that seems right. Another said, I went from back to front, the print is big, the headings are nicely spaced out. You can see what it's all about, you can skim it almost. And then it's well lays out, color-coded sections, easy to read, and the jargon is explained. So it's interesting how we get just sort of a variety of representations about how they felt the tool could be improved and what was good about it. So suggested alternate formats, just a couple of suggestions here. Perhaps there could be a call number for information, one said. Others felt that the importance of advanced care planning for the LGBT community was something that was well discussed in the focus group settings. So participants felt the focus groups highlighted the LGBTQ issues, and but as a standalone document, perhaps this is not so. Lastly, or close to lastly, level of completeness. Just a few critiques regarding the level of completeness in the guide were reported. They said examples of diminished capacity might be helpful. Another said NIDIS not represented as a repository for advanced care planning plans. And just for reference, NIDIS, it's a non-profitable charitable organization. It offers personal planning registry, and it's been operating in British Columbia since 2002. Interestingly, I felt that this comment displays that some of our participants were quite knowledgeable about advanced care planning. And we didn't mind recruiting that in the focus groups. We wanted to know people who had no experience of advanced care planning, no knowledge, and some people who have had some experience, sort of to balance out the conversations we had with them. They also commented there was no information about where to get a no CPR form online, and there was quite a bit of talk about how common law was not defined. So our conclusions, critique suggestions often span the full spectrum. However, the nature of the commentary suggests to me that addressing concerns would only increase the audience and not alienate those who did not share the concern. So what I mean by this, for example, is that the LGBT participants who commented that the guide was fine as is and did not need to be made more inclusive, I don't think they'd be disappointed or less likely to use the materials if they were further tailored to an LGBT audience. I feel though that the people who would respond to the tailoring, we should do that then. I think we get more people engaged with this material. So also it appears that the comprehensive guide like My Wishes, My Care may be better suited as a tool to be used in conjunction with an interactive live format, such as a focus group. Many commented that it was far too long and it was a bit of a barrier. One participant noted how the focus group brought the LGBT issues to the forefront, in regards to the advanced care planning. Also, the educational tools, they could benefit by ensuring that they are culturally inclusive, and this is in terms of both language and imagery. And so, sort of as a grand conclusion, I think when possible, it appears that tailoring these materials, we could reach a wider audience, we could have more engagement, and ultimately, perhaps having more people preparing their advanced care plans. Just going to say a little bit about our primary care physician to hospitalist study. In this study, we're interested in learning about primary care physician to hospitalist experience and views on advanced care planning tools and their use with LGBT, South Asian, and Chinese populations. I've completed 3 interviews to date, all with primary care physicians. The study is still underway. However, I'd like to share just a few comments that tie into the research presented today. In particular, the role of chosen family for LGBT older adults. So here's a few quotes we have. I think the main thing I have noticed is that several of my patients or caregivers from the LGBT plus community do not have strong ties to family, or even the concept of family in comparison to my other clinical practices. And this often means that they have less support through the process. Another doctor said, an LGBT patient who doesn't have family or even a substitute decision maker, and I recognize that I'm likely the person that's situated to provide an emergency room doctor with information about my patient's goals of care. And lastly, LGBTQ patients have less robust immediate family and fewer have children to help look after their needs as they age. A lot of them are doing it on their own or with a very small circle of friends. So I think it makes it even more important for family physicians to initiate this discussion. So I think the real takeaway here at this moment is about the important role of friends in the lives of older LGBT. It's what we're learning from the physician study does tie back into our focus group research and some of the literature we have discussed. I am now going to unmute Brian DeVries, Dr. Brian DeVries and Dr. Gloria Gutman, and I want them to provide some reflections on our process thus far. Now, let me see here. Okay, Gloria is on. And I guess, do you want to go first then?
Sure. Well, this is a very interesting research project. And as you probably have gathered, our part, the diversity access team's part, crossed the 3 sectors of the broader project, which are primary care, long-term care, and hospital care. So the study that Robert has talked to you about and described falls within the primary care sector. So it's older adults who are still living in the community. So additionally, as part of our work, we are doing focus groups and introducing the tools to people who have a relative in long-term care or who themselves are residents of long-term care. It's been difficult to reach residents because these days many of those who are in facility are cognitively impaired. It's also particularly difficult with respect to the LGBT community. And it's hard to tell whether the problem is that people are afraid to disclose their gender identity and sexual orientation. They don't want to come out in a care facility setting, or if in fact there's many fewer people in that setting than we think, because they're just so afraid of going into care, into facility care. So it's hard to get a handle on the prevalence, the numbers of people of LGBT people who are living in care facilities. With respect to the hospital sector, we are interviewing physicians or other clinicians to try to get their perceptions of what are our barriers and what are facilitators for patients and their families from the LGBT community to do advanced care planning. And as Robert said, the data so far, he's done 3. In fact, there are 3 or 4 other interviews that have been completed by other members of our team with individuals who work with people from the 2 ethnic communities that we're focused on, the Chinese and South Asian. And I'm struck by some of the similarities across our groups of interest, but also some of the things that are very unique. And just to make one small point, Robert did point out that many of the LGBT people do not have families that they can rely on if they need assistance as they become frail. The issue for some people in the ethnic communities is that they are in the same situation in that their relatives are in some other country. And so they have to rely on friends or on non-relatives. So that we're always faced with the question of, do we use a generic tool or do we need to target specifically to the groups of interest? It's expensive to do translations. Translations don't always give you the cultural significance or the cultural flavor. I recently attended a webinar that I thought was very, very interesting, in that they brought both translators and interpreters to look at documents, because you really need both. You know, literal translations may not do the job. Similarly, in the case of the LGBT community, to write words that will fit their particular configuration of support networks is really, really important. So, Brian, take it on.
Okay, I'm just going to try. I have difficulty unmuting there. I got it now.
There.
Okay, Brian.
Good, thank you. Good morning, at least from the West Coast, everyone. And thank you, Robert. That was a really well done and informative webinar. I appreciate the effort you've put into it, and you've made it very clear. And thank you, Gloria, for your comments. Maybe follow up on a couple of things that you both have said. One has to do with the relative absence of family amongst LGBT persons. We found that now in a wide variety of studies, both urban and non-urban settings. And so that becomes a kind of crucial issue. Gloria and I and several others have now commented in focus groups on the frequency with which we've heard something like the following. When we've asked participants to think of who might be there for them at a time of need, and using a question to conjure up some of those issues for them. So say you have a colonoscopy, you will not be released unless there's somebody there to take you back to your home and hopefully stay with you for a while. Who would that be? And when we've asked LGBT people, and particularly gay men, prior to that, they said they're pretty well prepared, they have their documents, but in response to this question, they're kind of flummoxed, that they don't know who that person would be. And And so that really represents the critical hole kind of in this organizational scheme of advanced care planning. The absence of a person who could perform at that level in relation to the individual. Friends certainly, as Robert has mentioned, rise to the challenge in ways disproportionate to what we've seen among heterosexual populations. But we're also seeing, excuse me, we're also seeing that there's cracks kind of in that where friends are saying, you don't know, I don't know if I would be able to do the kind of intimate care that he or she needs as a friend. And we're having the individuals themselves saying, I don't want to bother my friend, or I don't know that I want to ask my friend to do that. And so there's an ambiguity in the space that exists between the individual and these friends, even as these friends are the primary sources of support who are likely to be the caregivers and to intervene once advanced care plans come into fruition. So it's a really interesting kind of dynamic around relationships, around social isolation, and the relative absence of family in a variety of forms. Just a couple other quick points, if I might, that what we've also found, as Robert has pointed out, in terms of the extent to which ACP has been engaged, in which they've engaged in advanced care planning in some way, that there's also an interesting group amongst primarily older gay men, some of whom are living with HIV and have been living with HIV for a long period of time, who had a point earlier in their lives been very near to death and had been told by physicians, for example, to get these documents in order, and then they did and made those sort of arrangements. And then advances were made pharmacologically in the treatment of HIV, and these men survived. When we've talked with these men, some of these men, they've said, you know, I've already done that. I have my advanced care plan. Well, it's 30 years old, and many of the people who were identified therein have died. Or people have said, I've done it and I don't want to do it again. I can't go back there. And so the notion kind of advanced care planning for this group of older gay men, some with HIV, not all, is a kind of re-traumatization. The idea that even thinking of and revisiting these issues re-traumatize, return them to the trauma of the very early years of HIV/AIDS, when governments shamefully turned their backs on individuals and hospitals refused to treat and mortuaries wouldn't take the bodies, and just the horrible times that existed early on, and people not wanting to go back to that emotional place. So there's the personal history, I think, is a crucial element as we try to understand advanced care planning amongst any group, but we see it here particularly amongst LGBT persons, and of my examples, primarily amongst gay men. But there's evidence of that in different forms amongst the other cultural groups as well, too, of the role of culture, of the role of the history of culture, of families around dealing with death, and that helps set the context. And that's a piece, I think, that hasn't been well explored in the literature, and that our study can start to sort of point at, is the context within which this advanced care planning takes place, that is culturally and individually determined. And that's an exciting kind of advent and piece of this that I hope we can move forward with. Perhaps I'll leave it there, Robert, so as not to go on, but thank you for the opportunity and for the work you've done on this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and also thanks to Gloria for the comments and, sort of tying this research into the bigger picture. And what we'd like to do now is, let me just take a look. There we go. We'll take some, there's a little, you can open up the questions section down there in the bottom. I'll just take a look and see what we have so far. And we have Matt, I have trouble opening my question section more than one line. So yes, I have a question here about the webinar being recorded. So that is correct. It'll be available to people. Hi. Yeah, I can only see one line on the question section.
So did you try clicking the square box beside the X?
Yeah, I've got that. I've got it sort of, the square box beside the X. Okay, let me see. That's much better, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So yeah, if anybody would like to add a question about the research or advanced care planning or what we've talked about today, just feel free to type into that question box, open it up. So far we just have the question about if it's going to be recorded, and that's yes. And that is all thus far.
Hey, Robert, can you still hear me okay? It's Brian.
Yeah, I can hear you fine, yeah.
I wonder what your experience might have been with kind of gender differences amongst lesbians and gay men, for example, in the nature of the discussion, the nature of preparation. Nothing sort of left out in large form, but I wonder if there were nuances that you saw.
Sure, I think one of the nuances might be that I do recall all of the comments on the guide does not need to be tailored were all from gay men. So that was an interesting point. Yeah, hello? Yeah, so they were all from gay men in terms of if you did not need to tailor the tool. Also, I found that, as I mentioned, the guide is commenting on both my wishes and my care. When we talk about advanced care planning, a lot of people think about documentation. They think about what forms to fill out, making a representation agreement, where to store it. But I think one of the things in this research that really came out was the very deeply personal comments about the care side, like for example, the not wanting to wear the only wanting to wear pajamas and not a nightgown. And another lesbian participant also said that, you know, she didn't want to be, she worried about being dressed in, you know, feminine wear. And she kind of preferred, you know, not to be put in a dress or something. So I think that part from the lesbian participants, there was a bit more comment on the care side, the personal aspect of the care. So there's one more comment here. It says, most of these concerns about the tool sound like what we hear from the general population. Many older folks are worried about not having anyone close to them. It's not unique to this population, but I do think we need to stare this down. So that is an interesting comment, and it sort of does tie back that we felt, you know, and some people recognize that advanced care planning is for everybody, and that is certainly, you know, part of what we found. But we did find that perhaps more people would engage with advanced care planning if we tailored the guide to be more inclusive. There was a real, I think the language and the photos were the biggest thing. It's like half of the participants didn't recognize that was a same-sex couple, and I actually just thought it was two men sitting on a park bench myself. I'm just going to see here, we have another question here. It says, there seems to be concern about how a written document will get to healthcare providers in the heat of the moment. Not sure if this is different in BC, but in Ontario, we really stress that the document counts for nothing, only the words that come from the mouth of the SDM, which is your term for temporary substitute decision maker that we have in BC. And the question is it different in BC? I think the main thing is that people worry if they don't identify the substitute decision maker in advance. So with LGBTQ, if it ends up being chosen how it's set out by BC law in that slide. Perhaps they would have liked to have a friend as a person making their decisions, whereas perhaps a sibling would count higher up the list and actually be speaking for the the patient at the time when they would prefer to have another person. I see that Brian lost audio. I wonder if he's back now. Okay. I'm just going to see. Do you want to be back in, Brian? You said you're muted. Let me see there. Hi, Brian. Did you want to offer some?
Hey, everyone. Sorry, I don't know what happened. A little hiccup here on my Wi-Fi, I think. So I missed out. I'm sorry, Robert, on maybe the last couple minutes of what was
here.
happening.
I'll just get your comments. I'll read this question again. It says, there seems to be concern about how a written document will get to healthcare providers in the heat of the moment. I'm not sure if this is different in BC, but in Ontario, we really stress that the document counts for nothing. Only the words that come from the mouth of the substitute decision maker count. And he asked if that was different in BC. And I responded that it's the important thing we found in the focus groups was that the big concern was if they had not identified a substitute decision maker, and that if someone else was chosen from higher up the list, like a sibling, that perhaps they didn't want speaking for them, was something was highlighted in our sessions.
Well, it's and I don't know the BC circumstances well enough to be able to answer that explicitly. So I apologize. What I have heard is that certainly in the heat of the moment, having somebody who's identified as the decision maker plays a lot, but the written document is often what people rely on as what would be held up in court. So I bet there's some ambivalence certainly about that, and especially if there's some discrepancy, I bet. But sorry, I don't have the answer to the provincial differences.
Yeah, and there was another question that you probably missed. It said most of these concerns about the tool sound like what we hear from the general population. Many older folks are worried about not having anyone close to them, but it's not unique to this population. But I do think we might need to stare this down.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of and in some of my writings, I've kind of ended papers that way, with the notion being that the study of LGBT lives, I mean, for so long, LGBT persons have not been counted, have not been studied, and so we've got a lot of making up to do to better understand the circumstances of lives and aging for LGBT persons. But the more we understand, the more we realize is that even as there are many uniquenesses that are related to sexual orientation and gender identity, so too are there many circumstances and many conditions that apply much more broadly. So, for example, some of the demographic hallmarks of LGBT lives are singlehood, the absence of children, fewer social contacts, and those, as the person who offered this question rightly suggests, are not LGBT specific experiences, but so much of the gerontological literature has had such a strong heteronormative sort of orientation, of family first kind of orientation, that I think part of the benefit of studying LGBT lives is to challenge that heteronormativity, which sort of opens up our language, opens up our way of studying older adults in general, such that we don't presuppose that they have adult children who will be there, or grandchildren, or spouses, and that we could ask for more kind of person-centered issues. And I think LGBT studies kind of promote that approach.
Yeah, I think also I just noticed that I had Gloria back. She perhaps by default went back to mute. I'm just going to unmute her and see if Gloria, do you have any sort of comments to finish up on?
Yeah, BC is unique in having both the representation agreements, which are a particular form of where one can identify the person that you wish to represent you and speak for you. And it has a couple of parts to it. One has to do with care. The other has to do more with assets and finances. BC also is unique in having the NIDUS registry. In many of the focus groups we've done, that has been something of great interest to the people we talk to, because it means there is a repository where you can put your representation agreements so that, in answer to some of the points that Robert made from his groups, where they said, well, gee, I forgot where I put it, or how is anybody going to find it? There is a place that you can register these things. That does not occur in every jurisdiction. So it would be interesting to know how many members of the LGBT community in fact take advantage of the representation agreement and the registry. At the moment, it's hard to get that kind of data. So in terms of our project, we would really be delighted if people who are members of the community and who have used these resources would feed back to us what their experience has been.
Sure, that's great. I'm glad we had a couple questions there, and it helped us sort of expand the discussion. Does anybody else have a further question? Just take a look here. So I guess if the questions are finished up, Brian, did you have any sort of final words to say, or?
No, I appreciate having had this opportunity, and thank you for your work on this, Robert. It was a clear, really informative webinar. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And Gloria, do you have any sort of final comments?
We might note that just this week I saw an announcement that the NIA in the United States has given a big grant to researchers to get insight into the needs and experiences of LGBT older adults with Alzheimer's disease and their surrogate decision makers. So there's subsets within the population that have special needs regarding who's going to speak for them. And things like dementia cut across all of the groups that we work with. But it's one more layer of difficulty if you're the caregiver of a person with dementia and you're not, for example, in a legal relationship, you're not officially recognized as married or otherwise enabled to speak for your loved one who has dementia.
Yes. Okay. And just wanted to say thanks for those who asked a few questions here at the end, and also thanks to everybody for joining us today and participating in the webinar. And I think with that said, we can wrap it up. Thanks again. If you have any further questions, I do have my email address on the screen, this final screen here. All right. Thank you.